All right, so it is 7:05, so I think we're going to get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this second public forum to talk about Obear Park and the feasibility study that we've been working on. So we're going to have a presentation first, led by Lisa Chandler, our city engineer. Oh, first of all, my name is Emily Hutchings. I'm the Assistant Planning Director. And I've been managing the engagement part of the process. Lisa Chandler is our assistant city engineer, and she has been the project manager. We also have with us Ginny Nelson and Brian Caulfield from CDM Smith, who are our consultants on the project. So we're looking forward to sharing some additional information with you this evening. We'll be having about a 30 to 40 minute presentation, and then we will be doing a question and answer session after that. With that, I'm going to kick it off to Lisa.
Thank you, Emily. And good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I do recognize a couple of new names along with a couple of old ones. So this is our second public forum for the Obear Park feasibility study that we are doing in conjunction with receiving a grant from CZM, which is the state's Office of Coastal Zone Management. So we held our initial public forum back in April. And we had at that point promised to come back in June and kind of give a little brief update after we had done a little more analysis and formulating of our plans moving forward. So some of this information might be new to you. Some of it might be just a repeat of what you may have heard in April. But in any rate, let's get started. So what I want to do this evening is just kind of go over the project, some of the current concept design options that we're looking at, some short-term solutions that we're looking to employ in the near future while the larger project is continuing to move forward through permitting and design, and just what the true next steps are for the final project. So this is kind of why we're here in the first place. So Obear Park, located in the Ryleside neighborhood of the city of Beverly, is experiencing what appears to be accelerated coastal erosion along some of the edges of the park, particularly near the recreational beach area. As you can see here, this photo on the left was taken in 2014, and you can see there in the background a sign, which is actually one of those signs posted that says no lifeguards. So you can see it's got a couple of feet of shoreline in front of it back in 2014. And in 2020, so about 6 years later, we had lost all of that land in front of it and about half of the land between the two posts, because the furthermost post is actually exposed. And then coincidentally enough, the weekend right after our last public forum, a storm had come through and the sign actually came down. So it really is just kind of reinforcing the fact that there is accelerated erosion in this particular area of the park, as well as along other edges of the shoreline, that is cause for concern, especially given where we believe we're headed, given sea level rise projections and just climate change in particular. So this project itself was identified in a number of citywide planning efforts that we have taken over the years. So back in 2017, the city did a coastal resiliency plan, and in 2019, we became an MVP rated community, which is to say the municipal vulnerability preparedness actions from the state. So in both of those studies, which had a high level of public involvement, Obear Park was identified as a high-risk, high-priority asset for evaluation and protection from both sea level rise and coastal flooding. So back in the summer of 2020, myself and Emily and our consultant team were able to pull together a grant application to the Office of Coastal Zone Management, and we were awarded a grant for $58,340 to do a feasibility study and conceptual design, which is this current project that we are in. We intended for this to be the first phase of a multi-phase project. So for now, we are just identifying what is causing the erosion at the park, other things that we should be aware of at the park. And then we are planning to go through design and permitting in the next phase, as well as going all the way through construction, and then possibly also looking for grant funds to do maintenance in the future. So right now, the focus of this phase of the project was to determine what appropriate methods, if any, existed to have some natural protections installed to stop erosion and the ever-growing degradation of Obear Park. We're not looking at hard protections such as seawalls or anything like that. That's not really kind of the avenue that the state prefers we take anymore in dealing with coastal resiliency. They really like more nature-based solutions, things that can give and take over time, that aren't posing risks to other areas nearby in wave reverberation and things of that nature. So they really, the living shoreline concepts as they are, as you'll start seeing popping up in other communities, are really kind of where this is moving forward for the state. The city of Salem and Collins Cove has installed a living shoreline approximately, a couple of years ago, and they've been doing ongoing maintenance, and it's just an ever evolving thing. They see what's working, what's not working, and how it keeps growing. But they've done a really good job of kind of preserving a little section of their city using softer nature-based solutions and making it a more natural shoreline there. So earlier this year, we had put out a public survey and a call for photos, and we had gotten a number of photos submitted to the state's MyCoast portal website that showed what people had observed for erosion over the course of the years, flooding over the course of the years. We got some pretty neat storm footage of just how the park experiences different coastal storms and how it reacts. We also put out a 21 question long survey that was actually very well received. We had over 500 responses from nearby residents, people that use the park on a daily basis. And then using these results, we were able to kind of take the hard coastal data that we were looking at and analyzing and coming up with the best solutions that kind of fit both molds. So one of the public survey questions was in an effort to figure out how people are currently using the park. The majority of people just walk around the park. Some just like to sit and look out at the river. Some people actually do fish there. A number of people use the beach. They bring their kids to play on the playground equipment or at the basketball courts. Some people actually launch their boats from here. The city has kayak racks located here, so a number of people come down to the park to use the kayaks. So it really is just a great neighborhood asset that can kind of be used in multiple ways all over the course of the park, but ultimately for us to keep using this in the future, we really need to come up with some way of slowing down or stopping the erosion altogether. We also were curious where people actually physically access the water. There are a number of kind of worn paths, but no true focal access point. And you can see here from the people that took the survey, the overwhelming access point was located down at the recreational beach, which here in this figure is point number 3. There are a number of people that also seem to use just kind of the western edge here, located as point number 2. Point number 4 there on your screen is what is currently near the kayak racks right now. So a few people did use it there. And then some people just kind of get out and about any which way, but 2 and 3 were the most heavily used access points, which is in keeping in what we'd be seeing. It makes sense that that's where most people are trying to access the water, as it's the most logical place to get down to what you're looking to do, be it swim or just sit on the beach, or even just walk along the coast. So the existing topography here, you can kind of see in this figure, the red line there is the indicative line of land subject to coastal storm flowage. So everything in front of that line floods on a regular basis. We are working a little bit against topography here. So parts of the park are situated high and we won't have to worry about them, but the edges of the park are actually very low, including the access roadway from Livingston Ave. It's situated very low given current high tide lines, as well as the projected high tide lines in the future, accounting for the current sea level rise models. So there is a little bit of elevation issues that we'll have to work against and come to some sort of agreement on how much flooding is appropriate and what can withstand, and what sorts of things we can do to just reinforce the edges so that when things do flood, the waters retreat naturally and we're not causing more damage. So big picture wise, it was a little difficult to see kind of how the erosion is being caused at the beach. So we decided to take a closer look at the actual shoreline changes along the edge of the park here, where we've noticed the most erosion happening. So what CDM Smith did was they took a look at all the different aerial photography that we have over the course of different years, and they were able to kind of trace the shoreline and just see how it moves over time. So you can see that that red line outline there was the 1969 shoreline, and we believe it kind of is receded there due to a hurricane that came through in the mid to late 1950s. So the shoreline kind of eroded very far back due to that, and then it was able to kind of naturally fill in over the course of years. And now you can see between the purplish line and the blue line there, there's a significant amount of erosion there at the beach, which is what we've noticed kind of in person there. So between 2005 and 2019, which is the last 15 or so years, there has been some increasing erosion at the point there. There are a number of causes for erosion that are completely natural. It's just things that we need to take into account for. So there is a fair amount of wave capabilities through the Danvers River. So wave action can be one cause of the erosion. Wind can be one cause of the erosion, though we're fairly well protected here given the bridge and just kind of the way the winds naturally are forming here, and also just sea level rise. There's also one other cause for erosion that we believe is also has something to do with it, which is just man-made erosion. So without having any formalized entrance point, we do feel that people just kind of jumping back and forth over the edge of the park and trying to scamper up and down does cause a little bit of instability there at the edge. So the best way that we can combat that is really to just kind of pull focus into a couple of key access points and try to let the rest of the shoreline kind of stabilize itself. So you'll hear me talk about a couple of different locations. So the west shoreline here, you can see the bathhouse in the back there. There's some salt marsh growing here in the intertidal space. You see some armor stone kind of placed around. So when we refer to the west shoreline, it's kind of the area that's not quite the recreational beach, but also not up into the true park yet. The west forested shoreline, you can see the playground equipment in the background there between the trees. So there is a significant amount of just kind of sloughing of the edge of the shoreline there as well. Some of the trees have come down. You can see some of the tree roots have become more exposed over time. You can see just kind of the fence line there at the edge. It's a pretty steep drop off there once you're standing up in the park and looking down. So there is definitely some erosion that's continuing to happen along on this kind of forested edge here. And then this is just kind of where do we think we are going with in terms of sea level rise at the park. So this orangey outline is the current shoreline at mean high water. And then in the year 2030, given the current projections, that's where we would stand. We're moving further and further into the park by 2050. And at 2070, there's a significant amount of the shoreline of the park completely inundated. You can see that the bathhouse is still okay and still above the high tide line. The playground equipment and the bulk of the center of the park is not at risk, but really the whole shoreline by the year 2070, including the access roadway in from Livingston Ave, is just completely inundated. So these are just the kind of things that we're going to need to come to some decision as a city of what are our best ways of protecting this. The roadway in does experience flooding now. It is one of the most common points that experiences flooding within the park. It is a very low lying road. It's approximately elevation 6.5, which coincides a little bit with the average high tide line now. So when there is a coastal storm, it's inundated quite easily. The city is looking at addressing that as part of a separate project. That whole roadway and the culvert beneath it is currently part of the Bass River dredging project, and it is supposed to be addressed when the river is dredged, but the city made a decision to not pull that part of the work into this project just because they take two different kind of avenues, both permitting wise and just kind of timeline wise. So the city is addressing that in the future. It's just not part of this current phase of this project. So CDM Smith took all of this data that we were able to gather from various sources, and we came up with some concepts for the design that could be done in each of the kind of three major areas. So that western forested shoreline, which is adjacent to the playground structure, the western beach area, and then kind of the recreational beach area and the kayak use. So for the beach area itself, there's a couple of different ways that we can handle it, but the best way to see it, a long-term solution, is to control access. So we'll create kind of two main focused access points, one centrally in the beach area and one near the kayak rack. There is an entrance over by the kayak rack that can get you down to the beach right now. It is not heavily used, but it can be used. What we would ask is that when you're launching your kayak, you bring your kayak down that preferred path, and then you still will have access once you're down at the beach level to move it around and launch from the best point, but it prevents you from just dragging kayaks over the edge of the embankment in all sorts of areas that's further causing erosion. And we'll also plan to install some vegetated berms with some Coir logs and some no-mow areas. So these would be along the shoreline, about 10 to 15 feet wide. They'll be vegetated with native grasses and just kind of typical salt marsh plantings. And what this will also do is kind of focus everyone to those two access points, and it'll hopefully allow the grasses to stabilize along the edge of the park and prevent further erosion back. So the Coir logs, you'll see in a graphic coming up, it's basically like a giant sock full of material that acts as kind of a barrier, and it's a softer barrier than you would see from like a rock wall or something like that, and it disintegrates over time. But what it does is it allows the stabilization of the shoreline to take place. And then by the time those logs disintegrate, hopefully the shoreline itself is stabilized with all the plantings. And then for that western shoreline, we would just do kind of 1 or 2 core log levels. So kind of almost like a core log wall in the non-forested area. And then further back near the playground equipment in the forested area, we would look to maybe cut back the slope a little bit in an effort to lessen the severity of the angle there, and put in some soil lifts, and then replant a bunch of the trees on that slope so that we can really get some good root growth happening and just kind of stabilizing that whole area. It would involve a number of permits to do that, just so that we can ensure that for the long term, it's not quite such a vertical drop off there. So that that yellow line there is where we would have kind of the soil lift wall with some core logs and replanting of the trees. Some of those trees right now are in danger of falling in. Some have fallen in and just haven't been picked out of the area. And some are hanging on in there, but what we really need to do is just identify everything that is in danger of collapsing from a safety perspective and removing it, and then replanting trees both here along the edge, as well as replanting trees throughout the park, just because we definitely wouldn't want to lose any of that stability anywhere. The blue line there is where we would have a bit of the just 1 or 2 core logs. And then that green there is we'd expect to have both the core logs along the edge, as well as some berm and some no-mow areas of just not cutting the grass to allow the grasses to really penetrate as deep as it can into the soil along the edge of the park there. This is just kind of a graphic. This is where basically what we're looking at now. I mean, it drops off about 18 inches to 2 feet in some areas as a pretty steep drop off on the edge. It's not safe for young children. It's not safe for really anyone if you're not quite paying attention to where you're walking. So what we would look to do is kind of install those core logs at the edge where the drop off exists. And that way, as the waters come in during tide, it's hitting that and it's not allowing it to just keep eroding the bank further back. The vegetated berm there on top, this graphic shows it at about 15 feet wide, and that'll depend on just kind of the grasses and the slopes and everything we have out there. But I think 15 feet is a pretty nominal width for most of the area. You'll see some salt marsh grasses there. You'll see some kind of just natural beach grass that'll look very natural, like it was kind of always intended to be there. And what this will do is it'll really allow us to keep everyone's focus at those 2 main access points and just kind of give the shoreline a chance to just hold on. So what you would see out there in reality would just kind of be 1 or 2 rows of logs, and we would have the ability to get some salt marsh grasses in between those, planting everything at an appropriate elevation so that it gets inundated with the tidal waters appropriately. We would actually be able to expand habitat this way. So it's just really a great natural way to improve the ecosystem and just keep the erosion at bay. This is a concept of what that west forested shoreline could look like. There would be some trees planted in here as well, but just kind of low-lying native plants. You'd see some salt marshes in the front. Those kind of misplaced boulders that are out there right now that clearly have been kind of tossed around in the storms. We would leave them in place and act as additional armoring in the front of the shoreline there as they are. And then over time, kind of those core logs would begin to disintegrate and everything would just kind of naturally hold up over time. We'd also be looking to install a number of signs in and around the project. Our best weapon is education here. So why it's all well and good to do this, but if people continue to climb over the edge and climb over the berm and play in it, it's only going to last us for so long. So having signage out there to explain what it is we're looking to achieve, why we're doing it this way, what we felt was the best way to do it. We have a number of things that we're looking to bring to some of the local school groups to kind of get them involved, maybe have them help with the plantings over the course of time, just really get people to take ownership of this. Because if they feel like they've done their part to help do it, it'll instill some sense of ownership and just wanting the project to succeed even more than they would naturally, and just really moving forward in a positive direction. So how do we move forward here? So what we can't solve here is flooding. It's just not, the park will continue to flood in the future, but what we can do is make it more susceptible to not having long-term issues when it floods, reinforcing the shoreline so as the floodwaters recede, it's not actually washing material back out into the river with it. Keeping everyone aware that the best way to access the beach will be through these kind of formalized entrance ways and not just kind of hopping over the edge any way they want. Just keep informing everyone of climate change. I mean, we're years ahead of where we were even 10 years ago, and I'm sure 10 years from now, it'll be even different. So it's an ongoing education for the city to undertake for itself, and it's an ongoing education for the city to kind of help the residents forward in what the best thinking at the time is. So because this is phase one of a project that will take multiple years, we also wanted to be able to employ some short-term solutions while we're furthering the design process. So there are some things that we can be doing now that don't require any permitting efforts. They're not in foul of jurisdictional areas. So what we are looking to employ short-term measures is to install some temporary fencing about 10 feet from the shoreline in some places. And then behind that fencing, we would have our no-mow areas. So the fencing will allow that kind of no-mow area to take shape and form and allow those grasses to kind of penetrate as deeply as they can to hold the material in place. We'll also be looking to install some educational signage at this point so that people are aware of what we're trying to do. And what this will also help us do is it'll really give people an idea of what they can expect to see in the future. And it'll kind of ease them into the process. And if we can have everyone understand what we're doing now with these short-term measures, I think it'll be useful for the long-term success of the future project. So in saying that, we came up with this kind of little graphic here. So all that green shaded area, we would look to just do a no-mow area. So basically, we would just have the grounds crew not mow about 10 feet from the shoreline. Obviously, this graphic is based on an aerial and it will differ from what's actually out there. But what we really want is about 10 to 12 feet of really usable grassed area along the edge, and then have this temporary fencing installed. This fencing would be something similar to just like some wooden stakes with some roping between it. It's not a visual barrier at all. It's meant just to keep people from kind of just running off the edge there. It would give you pause. You would have to stop and think before you ducked under the fencing. But it will in no way block your view or alter how you actually can use the beach once you're down on that level. We really just want to be able to give the edge a chance to start stabilizing on its own before we come in during construction. So we'd have these two paths here. That one marked kayak path is basically a formalized path right now near the kayak racks. But what we would do is we would just look to make it so that it makes more sense for the kayakers to be able to drag their equipment down there rather than dragging it through the park and then down the other edge. And the pedestrian path would be 20 to 25 feet wide, plenty of room for everyone to come down with all of their, the family and kids and everything like that. It's in no way meant to shut any edge out. It's just kind of trying to formalize things in a way that makes sense for the most people. And again, this is a short-term solution, and it could change while we're out there, and it could change just once it's in use and we see that it's really not working. It's just giving us the chance to kind of do something while we're waiting for the rest of the project timeline to catch up. So right now, today is June 10th. So the grant itself had to be completed by June 30th of this year, which we are pretty close to finishing up. We have our final report written, and it's just being vetted by the Coir team right now. And we expect to have that submitted to CZM as our final deliverable in the next couple of weeks here. And what that's doing is that's closing out this current phase of the project. And then the city is looking to hire a technical consultant in the fall just to take this final report that we currently have and kind of just go through it with a fine-tooth comb, offer any additional expertise he might have, so that come the spring of 2022, we can apply for another round of grant funding to bring these current concepts through the final design and permitting phase. Those permits, we expect to take a little bit of time to obtain. There's a number of state agencies that have to weigh in. There's a number of permits that are required for this kind of work. But we're hoping that in taking this little bit of time right now to really flesh out these concepts as they are, that it'll be a smoother process in the end, getting through the permitting. So we're hopeful that if we are successful in obtaining those grant funds in the spring, that final design phase will begin right away in the fall. And there'll be a number of additional opportunities for both public input here in the design phase, as well as during the permitting phase, because a number of those permits have public input processes. So this is certainly not the end or the last you'll be able to weigh in on this, but for right now, we are just focused on kind of finishing this up, wrapping it up for our current CZM grant, and then getting it on sure footing for the final design phase. And I mean, the city is very hopeful for this project, but in using grant funds to support us, it does come with a timeline because grants are only available so often, and then they have their own sets of deadlines and things of that nature. So we are definitely moving forward in our plans, and that's why we're looking to kind of employ some of these short-term measures as kind of like a stopgap between now and finally getting out to build things, because what we don't want is for things to get too far gone, because it's just taken all this time to get through to the final construction phase of the project. So I'd like to now open it up if you have questions. If you don't want to speak right now, that's totally fine. That's my email address right there. You can send me anything at any point in time. I certainly will respond to the best of my ability. And if I can't, I will reach out to our consultant or anyone else I need to get whatever answers you're looking for. But with that, I will see if anyone has any comments right now. That Emily, you can certainly put them in the chat. If anyone wants to talk at any point in time, they're more than welcome to as well. But yes, thank you everyone for joining us. I know some of that information was probably a repeat for you, but hopefully you guys are pleased with where we're trying to head with this project, and we will keep moving forward.
Thanks, Lisa. So as Lisa noted, I'll be moderating the questions. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we can see if we can allow you to talk. We are recording this, so it doesn't record necessarily the attendees. It's just the panelists and the presentation. BevCam is a recording as well. So if you have seen some of this information and you think, oh, my neighbor needs to know about this. Ooh, I want to tell my friend about this. Everything will be on BevCam's YouTube channel. We will also be putting the presentation up on our sustainability webpage. And before I get to questions, I also do want to put a big thank you out there to our stakeholders and our partners in this project. Salem Sound Coast Watch has been a fantastic partner in this project, and they've been with us every step of the way. Ward 1 Councillor Todd Rotondo has also been with us every step of this project, the Ward 1 Civic Association, making sure that everyone is involved, everyone knows what's happening. So we really appreciate their input, and we are really excited to hear from you all. We really appreciate anyone who responded to the survey. That has helped us enormously in understanding how the park is used. And thank you to CDM Smith, who've been a great consultant on this project. And finally, thank you to the Coastal Zone Management Department at the state for their grant assistance and their assistance throughout the project. With that, I am going to look over to the chat. I don't see any questions coming in yet, so we'll give people a minute to type in any questions you might have, and we'll make sure, if we can't answer them right now, we'll make sure that we find the information and provide it.
Thanks, Emily. And you actually just reminded me of two things. I also want to thank Paul Earle and the Beverly Harbor Management Authority for also being a partner on this. They were very helpful in understanding the way the kayak racks are set up there and ways that we can make that kayak path more friendly in the future. Also, Salem Sound Coast Watch is working on something that we call story mapping. So it's just kind of like a neat little package that shows kind of how the project has come to be, some of the data analysis, everything that's moving forward, kind of the history of the park itself, the history of the project, and it puts it in like a nice, convenient little friendly graphical presentation. They're working on that right now, and that will be available shortly. And all of this information, including our final report, will ultimately be on the sustainability website for the city under the Obear Park project. So you will be able to find all of this information, including the first public forum information, this public forum information, and all of our final kind of presentation graphics, as well as the final report that's coming from CDM Smith. So if at any point in time you have questions or you just couldn't remember what we had said or something of that nature, it's definitely all going to be available there. You also can just email me directly if you'd like to be kept up to date as we're moving forward in this process. I do have the names of a couple of people that were part of the first public forum that wanted to be on what we called the mailing list, just to keep informed. So if you don't have anything specific that you want to ask, but you do want to keep informed just in case you think you might miss future opportunities to give comment, certainly just send me an email, I'll add you to the list. And then every time we have a new update in the project, I'll send out kind of a little note.
Thanks, Lisa. Paul, I'm so sorry I forgot you. Absolutely, thank you. So we have a couple questions coming in. First one, I just want to read because it's from Paul. It said, very good presentation, concise, understandable. HMA would like to stay involved. So thank you, Paul. We're looking forward to working with you and the HMA in the future for future phases. So now we have a question from Robert Buchsbaum, and he is asking, will the grassy strip that won't be mowed be a salt-tolerant species? Lisa, do you want to answer that?
I was having an issue unmuting myself. Robert, so right now, the plan right now that's not being mowed is just the grass that exists there right now. So we're basically just going to have the grounds crew just not go any further than 10 feet from the edge. But in the future for the final project, we would look to have some no-mow areas in addition to that berm. And when we would be actually placing seed, that would definitely be a salt-tolerant grass mix. But for what's out there right now in this near-term solution, we weren't intending to add any actual seed mix. So it would just be a not mowing of the grass species that already exists out there in the park.
Our next comment is from Deb Dumel. She says, not a question, but thank you for doing this great work and communicating throughout the process. So thanks, Deb. We appreciate your participation. The next comment is from Michael Hakim. He says, I heartily support your approach to this project. It has all the proper technical approaches to stabilization for the long run. The success of this project will be highly dependent on cooperation from the park's users. With that in mind, I believe you need to be very careful with your signage. The general public won't often read long verbiage on signage, so they need to be succinct. They need to promote stewardship of this important resource, so perhaps the signs should encourage all who enter to become stewards of this environment. Thank you, Michael. I think we all agree that we need to make sure that the signs are succinct and encourage people to become stewards and catch people's eyes. Sorry if you just heard my dog barking in the background.
Yes, Michael, I do agree. The shorter, the better with signage. And usually we try to do it as graphically as possible also because people tend to notice pictures before they're willing to read words. So that actually will probably be a pretty lengthy process internally of figuring out how we want the signage to read and making sure that it makes sense for both the audience and getting across our point. So it might be one sign that's just repeated. It might be a series of signs that just kind of touch on points. So I think this near-term signage will have some similarities for what we would expect for long-term signage, but it also might be just a little different, just to let people know that also this isn't what they'll see before them now is not the final look of the project. It's just merely intended as a near-term measure for the long-run success of this project. But thank you very much for that comment. I definitely agree.
Our next question is from Deb Dumel. Any thoughts or concerns about undermining the core logs or erosion on the back side of the core logs when they are in place? So I'm wondering if that's a question for Ginny or Brian.
I can take this one. So yeah, I mean, that's part of the thought process we have is, we're looking at once we install those core logs, you kind of screw them into place or you tie them down, but you do look at, what could potentially happen with additional erosion in front and then anything behind it. But, the whole idea of, as Lisa started with, using these natural nature-based features is that they're more adaptive. You're not going to tend to see as much erosion as you would see if you had rock, because the idea is you're going to dissipate the wave energy and any type of event instead of kind of reflecting it and increasing the energy in that area. So that's why we're trying to go with this more natural type of material right now.
Thanks, Brian. Let's see, I don't see any more questions or comments as of yet. We're here until 8, so please feel free to type your comments in the chat, raise hands if you'd be interested in speaking rather than typing. And we'll be hanging around until then. But if you do need to go, we thank you very much for your participation. We really appreciate you being here. We appreciate all of the questions and comments that have been stated so far. They've been very thoughtful, and we're looking forward to coming back and talking with you all in future phases of the project.
Yes, thank you all very much for coming.
I do have one more question. Let's see, another one from Deb Dumel. What lessons learned have been brought forward from Collins Cove? Ooh, Deb, I wish Barbara Warren were here to answer that question because I think she would have a lot to say. She's not in town right now, otherwise she'd be here with us. But I think we did bring a lot from Collins Cove. I think Lisa or Ginny might be able to answer this question better than I. But we really were able to look at what they did and think, okay, well, Obear Park is similar in this way or it's different in this way. So here's how our approaches might differ.
Yeah, so I think one thing that they learned, so they left a number of openings within kind of the shoreline because people wanted to have a bunch of access points because they liked being able to walk out their front door and basically walk in a straight line down. And what they're finding is that a number of those have started to naturally close in or experience additional erosion just because there's too many openings. So I think that that really helped inform us of saying, well, we really should stick to 2 openings on kind of the edge that's not as heavily hit by wave action and just kind of wind action, because we are hoping for long-term success, and it's not going to benefit anyone if it's a constant maintenance issue of having to reopen entrances to the park or constantly having to close things down because they've become kind of a safety issue because they're eroding even further. So I know that was a big thing for them, and really just patience. So things take, and then over the course of one winter, things go away, and you just have to learn that it's an ongoing maintenance that you're taking control of. And it's to be expected, but just really building that into the operational program for the park is going to be a big undertaking for the city, of understanding that once this is constructed, it's really an ongoing thing that we are just going to be handling. And that's kind of informing what we are looking to install, to make sure that we're not trying to install things that are just impossible for us to maintain in the long run. And just really keeping track of best practices that they've been able to employ, that they've seen success with. It's helpful that they experience kind of similar issues that we experience here in Obear Park. So it's really a good kind of benchmark for what's succeeded and what hasn't. But I'm sure that Barbara could tell you all sorts of stories about their both successes and misses at Collins Cove. So, and she'll continue to be involved through every step of this project. They've been very helpful for keeping us involved and just letting us know kind of even the headaches they had to deal with every time it seems like we're hitting a roadblock. So yeah, they've been very instrumental in helping us along in this. So I'm sure that there will be more as we continue, especially as we get into the permitting phase, as she's already had to do all of this once before and deal with all the various state agencies.
All right, I'm not seeing any more questions at the moment, but again, we're here and until 8 or until everyone signs off. So thank you. So I have one more comment from Deb, just saying thank you. So thank you for participating, Deb. All right, just looks like all the members of the public have signed off. So if you're still here as a staff member, thank you so much for staying on. Thank you to BevCam for recording this and streaming it. We are really appreciative of that, and helping us bring this information to even more Beverly residents and stakeholders. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.